Chances are pretty good there's at least one of these in the room you're sitting in right now. It's a common light socket, an Edison socket to be precise, an E26 socket used primarily for residential and some light commercial applications in the United States. Most of our European friends will be using the E27, but I'll get to that. In this video, I plan to take you through the anatomy and history of the Edison socket, a few variations, and a few alternatives. Why should you care about the history of the Edison socket beyond perhaps a mild curiosity? Well, because it's a simple device with a number of very important lessons to teach us about the application and evolution of technology. The first lesson is that the primary ingredient to longevity is simplicity. Edison made famous a light bulb we barely use anymore because it was arguably quite bad, but that's also measured with the ruler of present knowledge. Regardless, Edison's bulb, or rather the bulb Edison became famous for, served its purpose for quite some time, but the Edison socket is what endured. Why is that? All things have a plateau of efficiency where functionality and reliability have been served insofar as it is necessary for most practical applications. My favorite example of this is a door hinge. There are many types of hinges for various applications, but the common butt hinge, which we use for our residential doors, has been around since 1783 and in its current form since 1900. Manufacturing improvements and building standards allowed us to make it just the right size for its purpose, and there hasn't been a whole lot of need to change it since. The light socket has a similar history. An electric light bulb will almost always require at least two wires, a hot and a neutral in the case of residential AC. Also, bulbs do fail from time to time in all forms, so it's a good idea to have a fast, reliable system for interchangeability. This also occurred to Thomas Edison in 1880 when he began trying to come up with a simpler way of changing lights. According to commonly held speculation, Edison was looking around his shop when his eyes landed on a kerosene can, specifically the lid, and a bulb went on in his head and quickly blew and needed replaced. I have to now point out that the bayonet socket, developed in the UK, had already existed for over a decade and was already standardized overseas. The bayonet featured a cylindrical body with a center contact at the bottom and an outer conductive sleeve serving as the second contact. Being a man of little originality who was extremely well practiced at borrowing ideas from other inventors and simply shouting them louder using his wealth, Edison decided to take the kerosene lid and the idea of the bayonet socket and create his own screw-type base. It's rumored that Edison actually cut the threads for the lid off his kerosene can to make the first prototype, which I believe, as it would have allowed him to not only benefit from someone else's ideas, but also yet another person's physical manufacturing efforts. The Edison socket, like the bayonet socket, puts the mechanical mounting and electrical interface together. With the first contact and mounting being the outer threads of the base, the bulb's second necessary contact is simply a protrusion that engages a springy contact at the bottom of the threaded sleeve, again like the bayonet socket. This arrangement also offers a couple safety features. The protrusion of the center contact allows for a large gap between the contacts while still maintaining a conveniently small socket profile. Also, the center contact is used as the hot, which naturally prevents some risk of users being grounded and having contact with a potentially hot part while attempting to replace a bulb. Edison's socket wasn't the standard right away, of course. He would need to force that to happen through a series of deals that allowed him to merge his companies, Edison General Electric and the Edison Lamp Company, with his competitor, the Thomson Houston Electric Company, in 1892, forming the General Electric Company. This made standardizing the Edison socket here in the United States fairly easy, among other things we'll cover in other videos. GE also acquired the Canadian General Electric Company in 1893, which is one reason, but not the sole reason, Canadian electrical components are more or less the same as in the US. General Electric would go on to become a dominant force in multiple industries such as aerospace, industrial machinery, healthcare, and of course residential and commercial electrical components. Being hell-bent on perpetual growth, GE eventually businessed itself out of business one sector at a time, leaving vast swaths of unemployment and economic instability in its wake for over half a century, eventually breathing its final invoice in April of 2024. Back to the Edison socket. Today, the Edison socket is still in use and comes in various sizes for various applications. This is the E12 socket, which is primarily used for candelabra bulbs as well as nightlights and various holiday decorations. The E12 is obviously rated for much lower currents than the US standard E26. The last thing I want to note about the E12 is that the C7 light bulb is not the same as the E12 base. C7 is a size and shape of the bulb itself, whereas E12 is just the base. Most C7 bulbs you've encountered probably have an E12 base, but they are not the same thing. If you need something a little more serious than the E26 socket, you can go commercial with a mogul socket, or E39. These are used in large industrial buildings, some larger stage lighting, street lights, and many 80s and 90s pot growers' closets. The mogul is rated for much higher current, and being larger can handle a bit more weight. This is my E39 base bulb. It's a corncob bulb. It's bright. Now, modern bulbs use a lot less current than their size equals of the past, so that's not as much of a concern, but there are a couple other more important concerns that folks have raised about the continued use of the Edison socket. Thermal creep is a risk in many socket types, not pin sockets or bayonet sockets, but that's why these are also often brought up as better alternatives by the aforementioned folks raising concerns. Housing damage exposing live circuitry is another concern, but it is a bit unfair for two reasons. One, if the housing is damaged on a great number of components, potentially hazardous things can be exposed. That's what the housing was there for in the first place. Two, if the housing is damaged, something is wrong and power should be cut to the whole kit and caboodle anyway, before replacing anything. Another issue with not only the Edison socket, but sockets and receptacles of many kinds, is stupidly designed adapters and accessories. While the Edison bayonet and pin sockets are more than sufficient to support the manufacturing regulated weight of their bulbs, adding things like this can put undue stress on parts not designed to bear weight or be put under tension. I've used these things. I've used them in bad ways. Most of the time you'll be okay for a bit, but consider this. The times when it's not okay are usually fairly catastrophic, usually requiring something be replaced at least, if not creating a fire hazard or injury. So try to avoid this sort of thing. The general concept of the Edison socket is fine. Obviously, it's worked for a long time, but being the best certainly isn't the reason we still use it. And that brings me back to the lessons the Edison socket has to teach us about the application and evolution of technology. Everything is a trade-off. Wide adoption means easier use and even cheaper manufacturing as certain components become broadly available. It also means changing is exponentially more painful. To replace the Edison socket now would take immense initiative and agreement. The light bulb itself has changed a few times, but there are always holdouts and applications where the normally better thing isn't better. Also, tons of components, like light bulbs, are already made and waiting in boxes for someone to need them. It would take a tremendous amount of retooling and time to do this. There's also the matter of efficacy. The Edison socket may not be the most advanced, nor pin plug or bayonet, but like the door hinge, there isn't really a need to be different. This design serves the purpose well enough that it isn't hindering other innovations or creating dangerous conditions regularly. In the UK, they use the E27 as opposed to the E26. What this means practically is that you can manufacture a base that's marginally looser in one over the other, their numbers being the size of the base in millimeters, without having to make two different ones for the two different regions. As an aside, the E in E26 and E27 both stands for Edison. It is not European in the case of E27. Not all European countries have the same standard, and it was Edison that created the screw-type socket. You may recall me mentioning that the bayonet had already been created and standardized prior to the Edison socket. There's a reason the Edison socket replaced the arguably superior bayonet when it comes to lighting, which I'll get to momentarily. The other sizes are similarly matched, with the US's E12 being similar to the E14 and the US's E39 being similar to the E40. The lesson here is probably that many manufacturers are willing to cooperate to a certain degree, but there are still some things they'll refuse to agree on for the dumbest reasons, sometimes just region. If you live in the US, you have to put up with marginally more dangerous electrical plugs and slightly less efficient 120-volt split phase, which will take a few more moments to toast your bread. If you live in the UK, you have to put up with not being able to simply admit that Americans are just as safe with their plugs because they're taught not to lick the damn things as children, 120 isn't that much less efficient, and that 60 Hz also happens to be the number of seconds in a minute, which has advantages that 50 Hz does not. The kind of advantage I would expect someone with a decimalized system of measurement to realize. And if you live in not the US or UK, you have to put up with American and UK citizens arguing about their electrical outlets and standards imposed on them by companies and politics they have no control over or stake in whatsoever. So, to summarize the lessons of the Edison socket, simplicity is better, except when it's not. Technology and adoption move at breakneck glacial speed, or the speed of profit, and everything is obviously better where I live than anywhere else, despite everyone's stuff being made in that one place. You know the one. I know this video is a bit of a change from what I've been doing lately, and that's because this is one of those things I've always wanted to do on this channel. Let me know the usual ways if you like this kind of video. They take a little longer to make, but I personally enjoy making them a lot more than testing someone's white-labeled widget. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do the thing with the thing and that other thing. And I do hope you'll join me next time as I continue exploring smarter circuits.